Dry Creek Valley, Montana Territory, September 1887. What happens when a woman the world called broken becomes the miracle a family prayed for? This is the story of Clara Hale, a woman abandoned by her husband and shunned by society who found redemption in the most unexpected place. But before miracles could bloom, she would have to survive the storm, both the one that raged in the sky and the one that threatened to destroy her spirit forever. The rain had just stopped falling over Dry Creek Valley that September afternoon, leaving the world soaked and gleaming under a hesitant sun. The storm had been fierce, one of those early autumn tempests that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, reminding every living soul that nature's power was absolute and unforgiving. Now in its wake, the valley lay quiet and still, as if holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The town of Dry Creek was small, just a scatter of wooden buildings along a dirt road that turned to mud whenever the rains came. There was a general store, a church with a modest steeple, a courthouse that doubled as a meeting hall, and a handful of other establishments that served the ranchers and farmers who made their living from this unforgiving land. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets were currency and gossip spread faster than wildfire. Outside the general store, a woman stood alone in the fading drizzle. Her name was Clara Hale, though most folks in town had taken to calling her other things, none of them kind. She was small in stature, with pale skin that spoke of too many days spent indoors, away from the judgmental eyes of the community. Her dress was made of worn calico, patched in places speaking of poverty and hardship. Her hands trembled as she tried to pull a wet shawl around her thin shoulders, but the fabric was so soaked it offered no warmth, no comfort, no protection from anything at all. Clara's eyes were what struck you most if you took the time to really look at her. They were hollow, not with cruelty or malice, but with a profound emptiness, the kind that comes from a wound too deep to speak of, too raw to heal. It was the look of someone who had lost not just a person or a thing, but a future, a dream, a reason to hope. Behind her, just inside the doorway of the general store, two old men stood watching. Their voices were low, but not low enough. She could hear every word. "That's the one whose husband left her," the first man muttered. His weathered face creased with what might have been pity or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell the difference in Dry Creek Valley. "Married her for a family, they say," the second man added, shaking his head. "But she can't have children. What use is a woman who can't give a man sons?" The words hit Clara like physical blows, even though she had heard variations of them 100 times before. Each repetition did not dull the pain. If anything, it sharpened it, cutting deeper into wounds that never seemed to close. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the muddy ground, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. She had come to town for supplies, simple necessities she could barely afford. Flour, salt, maybe some thread, if she had enough coin left. She had been living in a tiny room above the seamstress shop, paying her rent by doing mending work, taking in laundry, whatever jobs no one else wanted. It was a meager existence, but it was all she had. Clara reached for the heavy sack of flour she had purchased, trying to lift it to carry to the wagon she had borrowed. The sack was too heavy for her weakened arms, and she stumbled, nearly falling. The flour hit the ground with a thud, and she heard laughter from somewhere behind her. Her cheeks burned with shame. That was when he appeared. Elias Turner had been riding down from the ridge when he saw the commotion outside the general store. He was a man of 45 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent working the land under an unforgiving sun. His hat was still dripping from the rain, and his clothes were damp, but he sat straight in his saddle with the bearing of a man who knew his place in the world and was comfortable in it. He had not been looking for trouble that day. He had come to town for feed and supplies, maybe a moment of quiet conversation with Marshal Wyatt if the lawman was around. But when Elias saw the woman struggling with the flour sack, when he heard the whispers and saw the way people turned away from her, something stirred in his chest. It was not pity exactly, though there was compassion in it. It was more like recognition, the understanding that comes when you see someone else carrying a burden you yourself have known. Elias dismounted and hitched his horse with practiced efficiency. Then he walked over to where Clara stood still, trying to lift the flour sack, her hands shaking with effort and humiliation. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice deep and gentle. "Let me." Clara froze. Her eyes went wide like a deer caught in the open, every instinct telling her to run. But she was too tired to run, too worn down by months of surviving on the edges of society. She simply nodded, unable to speak. Elias lifted the flour sack as if it weighed nothing and carried it to the borrowed wagon. He set it down carefully, then turned back to her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her dress hung loose on her frame as if she had not been eating properly. But he could also see something else, something beneath the brokenness. There was a strength in the set of her jaw, a dignity in the way she held herself, despite everything. "Thank you," Clara whispered, the words barely audible. Elias tipped his hat. "You from around here?" Clara hesitated before answering. "I was," she said finally, her gaze drifting to the distant hills beyond the town, "before everything fell apart." Elias did not press for details. He had learned long ago that some stories needed time before they could be told. Instead, he just looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the worn dress and the hollow eyes to the person underneath. "The world has a way of falling apart, Miss Hale," he said quietly, "but sometimes it builds back better than before." It was a simple statement, perhaps even naive in its optimism. But there was something in the way he said it, a quiet conviction that made Clara wonder if he knew something about falling apart that she did not. For the first time in months, something flickered in her chest. It was not hope exactly, but it was not complete despair either. It was possibility. She gave him a faint, uncertain smile. "I wish I could believe that." "Give it time," Elias said. Then he touched the brim of his hat again and started to turn away. "Wait," Clara called out, surprising herself. Elias paused and looked back. "I don't even know your name." "Elias Turner," he said. "I run a ranch about 5 miles north of here." "I'm Clara Hale." "I know," Elias said simply. In a town like Dry Creek, everyone knew everyone's name and everyone's shame. "If you ever need work, Miss Hale, I could use an extra hand around the ranch. It's honest work, and it pays fair." Before Clara could respond, Elias had already mounted his horse and was riding away, leaving her standing in the mud, staring after him with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been gratitude. The ride back to the Turner Ranch took Elias through some of the most beautiful country in Montana Territory. The storm had washed the world clean, and everything seemed to shine with an almost painful clarity. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with the first hint of autumn snow. The grasslands rolled on forever, dotted with cattle and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. But Elias barely noticed the beauty. His mind was turning over the encounter with Clara Hale, trying to understand why he had made that offer of work. It had been impulsive, not like him at all. He was a careful man, measured in his actions, slow to trust. Yet something about the woman's situation had moved him in a way he could not quite explain. The truth was, Elias Turner knew something about brokenness himself. 5 years ago, in the spring of 1882, his wife Sarah had died giving birth to their second child. The baby, a girl, had died too. Elias had been left with his son Tommy, then just a year old, and a grief so profound it had nearly destroyed him. For months after Sarah's death, Elias had gone through the motions of living without really being alive. He fed the cattle, mended the fences, kept the ranch running, because that was what Sarah would have wanted. But at night, when Tommy was asleep, Elias would sit by the fire and feel the emptiness pressing in on him from all sides, threatening to swallow him whole. It was Tommy who had saved him. The boy's laughter, his need for attention and care, his absolute trust that his father would keep him safe. Slowly, painfully, Elias had learned to live again. Not the same kind of living as before. The wound of Sarah's loss would never fully heal, but he had found a way to carry it, to make room for joy alongside the grief. Now Tommy was 6 years old, a bright, energetic boy with his mother's smile and his father's stubborn determination. And Elias, though he would never have admitted it to anyone, was lonely. Not for romance exactly, though he missed the companionship of a woman. More than that, he missed having another adult in the house, someone to share the burdens and the small victories of daily life. And Tommy, for all his love and laughter, needed a mother's touch in ways that Elias could not provide. When Elias arrived at the ranch, Tommy came running out of the house, his face lit up with excitement. "Papa, did you bring me anything from town?" Elias swung down from his horse and caught his son in a bear hug. "I might have a peppermint stick in my pocket if you're good about helping me unload these supplies." Tommy's eyes went wide. I'll help a lot." Together, they carried the supplies into the house. It was a modest structure built of logs and chinked with mud, but it was solid and well-maintained. Inside it was clean but sparse, lacking the touches that a woman's hand would have brought. There were no curtains on the windows, no flowers in vases, no decorative touches at all. It was functional and nothing more. That night, after Tommy had devoured his dinner and been put to bed, Elias sat by the fire and thought about Clara Hale. He wondered if she would take him up on his offer of work. Part of him hoped she would. Part of him was afraid of what it might mean if she did. 3 days passed before Clara appeared at the ranch. Elias was mending a fence post when he saw the borrowed wagon coming up the long drive. He set down his tools and walked out to meet her, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Clara climbed down from the wagon, moving with a careful deliberation that spoke of physical exhaustion. She was dressed in the same worn calico dress, but she had clearly made an effort to look presentable. Her hair was neatly pinned, and there was a determined set to her jaw. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in town, "you said you might have work." Elias nodded. "I did. Still do if you're interested." "What kind of work?" "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the boy. General household tasks. I can pay you fair wages and provide room and board." Clara studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine if this was some kind of trick or trap. "Why would you offer this to me? You don't know me." "I know enough," Elias said simply. "I know you need work and I need help. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." "People in town will talk." "People in town already talk," Elias replied. "About you, about me, about everyone. That's what people do when they have nothing better to occupy their minds. I stopped caring what they thought a long time ago." Clara took a deep breath. "I need you to understand something, Mr. Turner. My husband left me last year because I cannot have children. The doctor told me years ago that I would never be able to conceive. If you're looking for someone who can give you more children, someone who can be a proper wife, I am not that person." Elias met her eyes steadily. "I am not looking for a wife, Miss Hale. I buried my wife 5 years ago, and I loved her more than life itself. What I am looking for is someone to help run this household and to be a good influence on my son. If you can do that, then your ability or inability to have children is none of my concern." The honesty in his words seemed to take Clara by surprise. She blinked rapidly as if fighting back tears, then nodded. "When would you want me to start?" "Today, if you're willing." And just like that, Clara Hale became part of the Turner Ranch. The first few days were awkward. Clara moved around the house like a ghost, unsure of her place, afraid to touch anything without permission. Tommy, for his part, was shy around her, hiding behind his father's legs whenever she came near. But slowly, tentatively, things began to change. It started with small moments. Clara would hum softly while she worked in the kitchen, old hymns her mother had taught her. Tommy, drawn by the music, would creep closer until he was standing in the doorway, watching her with curious eyes. Clara would smile at him, never pushing, just offering her presence, like a gift he could accept or refuse. One morning, about a week after Clara's arrival, Tommy came into the kitchen while she was making breakfast. He stood there for a moment, shifting from foot to foot, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to begin. "Miss Clara," he finally ventured. "Yes, Tommy. Pa says you like horses." Clara turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. She knelt down so she was at eye level with the boy. "I do like horses, very much. Do you want to see mine? His name is Copper, and he's the best horse in the whole world." Clara's smile was genuine, the first truly unguarded expression Elias had seen on her face. "I would love to see Copper." After breakfast, Tommy led Clara out to the corral where a small chestnut gelding stood grazing. The boy chattered away about Copper's various virtues, how fast he could run, how smart he was, how he always came when Tommy called. Clara listened with patient attention, asking questions, showing real interest in what Tommy was saying. Elias watched from a distance, surprised by the warmth that spread through his chest. Tommy had been so withdrawn around Clara at first, and now here he was talking her ear off like they were old friends. And Clara, despite her own pain and exhaustion, was giving the boy her full attention, making him feel heard and valued. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Elias found Clara sitting on the porch looking out at the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color, orange and pink and gold, the kind of spectacular display that only seemed to happen in the West. "He's a good boy," Clara said quietly as Elias joined her. "He is," Elias agreed. "His mother would have been proud of him." "Tell me about her, if you don't mind." Elias was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Sarah was strong," he said finally, "strong in spirit. She had a way of making you believe that everything would work out, even when all evidence pointed to the contrary. She loved this land, loved this life. And she loved Tommy with a fierceness that took my breath away. Losing her nearly destroyed me, but Tommy kept me going." Clara reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight of understanding that words could not convey. They sat like that for a long time, two survivors finding a moment of peace in each other's company. The days began to take on a rhythm. Clara would rise before dawn to start breakfast, and the smell of coffee and bacon would fill the house, waking Elias and Tommy. They would eat together, and then Elias would head out to work the ranch while Clara tackled the endless chores of keeping a household running. Tommy would help her when he could, fetching water, gathering eggs, doing the small tasks that made him feel useful and important. In the afternoons, Clara would often sit with Tommy and help him with his letters and numbers. She had a patient way of teaching, never making him feel stupid when he struggled, always praising his efforts. Tommy, who had shown little interest in book learning before, began to look forward to these lessons. One afternoon in early October, Clara noticed that the fence around the vegetable garden was sagging badly. Without being asked, she found tools and set about repairing it. Elias came across her, working her face flushed with effort, her hands gripping the hammer with surprising competence. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, genuinely curious. Clara did not look up from her work. "Had to learn everything when you are alone," she said simply. "No one was going to fix things for me, so I learned to fix them myself." Elias felt a surge of respect for this woman. She had been dealt a cruel hand by life, abandoned and shamed, but she had not given up. She had learned, adapted, survived. There was a quiet strength in her that reminded him of Sarah, though they were different in so many ways. "You are doing a fine job," he said. Clara paused and looked up at him, surprised by the genuine praise in his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Elias," he corrected gently. "We are past formalities, I think." "Elias," she repeated, testing the name. "And you should call me Clara." That evening, disaster struck in a small way that would have larger consequences. Tommy was playing near the barn when he tripped and fell, scraping his knee badly on a rock. He let out a wail of pain and fear that brought both Elias and Clara running. Clara reached him first. She knelt beside the crying boy, her face calm despite his distress. "Let me see, sweetheart," she said softly. Tommy held out his leg, tears streaming down his face. The scrape was not serious, but it was bleeding and clearly painful. Clara examined it quickly, then looked up at Elias. "Do you have clean cloth and water?" "In the house." "Bring them, please, and whiskey if you have it." While Elias fetched the supplies, Clara kept Tommy distracted. "You know what," she said conversationally. "When I was about your age, I fell out of a tree and scraped both my knees so badly they bled for an hour. My mother was so angry with me for climbing that tree. She said young ladies should not climb trees, but I did not care. It was worth it just to see how high I could go." Tommy's sobs had quieted to sniffles. "Really? You climbed trees? All the time. My mother despaired of ever making me into a proper lady." By the time Elias returned with the supplies, Tommy was actually smiling through his tears. Clara cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, using the whiskey to disinfect it despite Tommy's protests that it stung. Then she wrapped it in clean cloth and tied it off neatly. "There," she said, "good as new. You will have to be careful for a few days, but it will heal up just fine." Tommy threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tight. "Thank you, Miss Clara." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She hugged the boy gently, then released him. "You are very welcome, Tommy." That night, after Tommy was asleep, Elias found Clara on the porch again. She seemed drawn to this spot, this quiet place where she could watch the stars come out and feel the cool evening breeze. "You were good with him today," Elias said. "The way you handled his injury. You kept him calm, distracted him from the pain. That takes skill." "I had practice," Clara said. "I used to help the doctor back in my old town, before I married Marcus, before everything changed." It was the first time she had mentioned her husband by name. Elias waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "Marcus Hale," Clara continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "He was charming when we met, said all the right things, made all the right promises. He wanted a family, he said, a house full of children to carry on his name. I told him before we married that I might not be able to have children, that the doctor had warned me. But he said it did not matter, that he loved me for who I was, not for what I could give him." She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "He lied. Or maybe he believed it at the time, I do not know. But after 2 years of marriage with no children, he changed. He became cold, distant. He started staying away for days at a time. And then one day he just left. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a note saying he was filing for divorce on grounds of my failure to provide him with heirs." "I am sorry," Elias said quietly. "The worst part was not that he left," Clara continued. "It was how the town turned on me. Suddenly, I was the barren woman, the broken one. Women I had known all my life would cross the street to avoid speaking to me. Men looked at me with either pity or contempt. I became a cautionary tale, a warning to young girls about what happens when you fail in your most basic duty as a woman." "You did not fail," Elias said firmly. "The failure was his, not yours. A man who abandons his wife because she cannot give him children is no man at all. He is a coward and a fool." Clara turned to look at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "You really believe that?" "I do. And I think you would make a fine mother, Clara. Maybe not in the way you expected, maybe not bearing your own children. But the way you care for Tommy, the patience you show him, the kindness, that is what makes a mother. Not biology, but love." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Clara felt something shift inside her, some locked door beginning to open just a crack. "Elias," she said slowly, "why did you really bring me here? It was not just about needing help around the house." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "This ranch needs more than one heart to keep it alive," he said finally. "And Tommy, he needs someone who can love him as if he were her own. I cannot give him that. I can give him a father's love, but he needs more. When I saw you in town that day, when I heard what people were saying about you, I saw something in your eyes. Not defeat, though God knows you had reason to be defeated, but determination, strength, the will to survive. I thought maybe you were meant to raise mine instead." Clara's breath caught. "You mean you brought me here to be Tommy's mother?" "I brought you here to be whatever you choose to be," Elias said. "But yes, I hoped that maybe we could help each other, that maybe two broken people could build something whole together." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I do not know if I deserve that kind of grace." "Maybe that is what grace is," Elias said gently, "getting what you do not deserve, getting a second chance when all hope seems lost, getting love when you have been taught that you are unlovable." They sat together in the darkness, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Clara allowed herself to hope. Not that everything would magically be fixed, not that her pain would disappear, but that maybe, just maybe, she could find a new life here, a new purpose, a new reason to keep going. The next morning brought a new energy to the ranch. Clara tackled her chores with renewed vigor and even began making small improvements to the house. She found some old fabric in a trunk and fashioned simple curtains for the windows. She picked wildflowers from the meadow and put them in jars on the table. Small touches, but they began to transform the stark house into something more like a home. Tommy noticed the changes and delighted in them. He helped Clara hang the curtains standing on a chair to reach the high places. He brought her more wildflowers, proud to contribute to the beautification of their home, and every evening Clara would tuck him into bed and tell him stories, fantastical tales of knights and dragons and brave princesses who saved themselves. Elias watched all of this with a growing sense of peace. The house felt alive again, in a way it had not since Sarah's death. There was laughter in the rooms, warmth in the kitchen, joy in the small moments of daily life. And Clara, who had arrived broken and defeated, was beginning to bloom like a flower after rain. But peace in Dry Creek Valley was never destined to last long. On a crisp morning in mid-October, Trouble rode into town on a black horse wearing an expensive suit and a cold smile. Marcus Hale had returned. He arrived at the general store like he owned the place, his boots kicking up dust, his eyes scanning the street with the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him. With him was another man, older and harder, with the kind of face that spoke of violence barely contained. This was Silas Kane, and anyone in Dry Creek Valley who had sense knew to give him a wide berth. Marshal Wyatt was in his office when they arrived. He was a good man, honest and fair, but he was also practical. He knew when to fight and when to wait. When Marcus and Silas walked into his office, he greeted them with professional courtesy, but kept his hand near his gun. "Marcus Hale," he said, "did not expect to see you back in these parts." "Business brings me back, Marshal," Marcus said smoothly. "I have some matters to settle." "What kind of matters?" "Financial ones. My former wife, Clara, she still owes me money from our marriage. And there is the matter of Elias Turner's ranch. I understand he has taken my wife and given her shelter and employment. That makes him party to her debts." Marshal Wyatt frowned. "I do not recall Clara Hale owing anyone money." Marcus pulled a paper from his coat pocket and laid it on the desk. "This is a promissory note signed by Clara agreeing to repay certain debts incurred during our marriage. Since she has no assets of her own, I am within my rights to pursue collection from anyone who employs her." The marshal picked up the paper and examined it. It looked official with signatures and dates and legal language, but something about it did not sit right with him. "I will need to verify this," he said carefully. "You do that," Marcus said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "In the meantime, I think I will pay a visit to the Turner Ranch. See how my former wife is getting along." "Marcus," the marshal said, a warning note in his voice, "do not start trouble." "I am not starting anything, Marshal, just protecting my interests." After they left, Marshal Wyatt sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the promissory note. Something was wrong here. He could feel it in his bones. But without proof, there was little he could do. That afternoon, Clara was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She looked up and felt her blood turn to ice. She would have recognized that black horse anywhere, and the man riding it. Marcus. She stood frozen as he dismounted, unable to move, unable to think. All the old fear came rushing back, the terror of facing the man who had destroyed her life. But before Marcus could speak, Elias appeared. He had been working in the barn and had heard the horses. Now he positioned himself between Marcus and Clara, his face hard as stone. "Marcus Hale," he said, his voice cold. "This is private property. State your business or leave." Marcus looked past Elias to Clara, his eyes crawling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I came to see my wife." "Former wife," Elias corrected, "and she is under my protection now. Whatever business you think you have with her, you can conduct through me." "Interesting," Marcus said, his smile widening. "Tell me, Turner, are you aware that Clara owes me a substantial sum of money, and that by employing her, you have made yourself liable for her debts?" "I am aware of no such thing." "Well, you are now." Marcus patted his coat pocket. "I have all the legal documentation. If Clara cannot pay, and I know she cannot, then I will be forced to pursue other means of collection. Perhaps a lien on your ranch." Clara found her voice, though it shook. "That is a lie, Marcus. I owe you nothing." "The court will decide that," Marcus said pleasantly. "I have already spoken with Judge Harrison. He seems quite sympathetic to my case." Elias's jaw tightened. Judge Harrison was known to be corrupt, willing to rule in favor of whoever paid him the most. If Marcus had gotten to him first, this could be very bad indeed. "Get off my land," Elias said quietly, "and do not come back." "Oh, I will be back," Marcus promised, "and next time I will have the law on my side." He remounted his horse and looked down at Clara one last time. "You always were worthless, Clara, but at least now I can profit from your failures." He rode away, leaving Elias and Clara standing in stunned silence. Tommy, who had been watching from the window, came running out. "Pa, is everything all right?" Elias forced a smile. "Everything is fine, son. Just an old acquaintance of Miss Clara's. Nothing to worry about." But Clara knew better. She knew Marcus knew the depths of his cruelty and vindictiveness. This was not over. This was just the beginning. That night the three of them sat around the dinner table in heavy silence. Tommy sensed the tension and ate quickly, not his usual chattering self. When Clara sent him to bed, he went without protest, hugging her extra tight before he left. "I am sorry," Clara said once they were alone. "I should have known Marcus would find a way to hurt me again. I should never have come here. I have brought trouble to your door." "You have brought nothing but good to this house," Elias said firmly. "Marcus is the one bringing trouble, and I will not let him succeed. Tomorrow we will go see Marshal Wyatt, find out what exactly Marcus is claiming. There has to be a way to fight this." "You do not understand," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Marcus always wins. He has money, influence, connections, and I have nothing. Maybe it would be better if I just left, went somewhere far away where he could not find me." "No." Elias reached across the table and took her hand. "You are not running. Not anymore. This is your home now, and I will not let anyone take it from you. We will fight this together." Clara looked into his eyes and saw determination there and something else. Something that looked almost like love, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. "Together," she repeated softly, letting herself believe just for a moment that it might be possible. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of coming winter. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening. And in the town of Dry Creek Valley, Marcus Hale sat in the saloon with Silas Kane planning their next move. "The ranch will be ours within a month," Marcus said confidently. "Turner does not have the resources to fight us in court, especially not with Judge Harrison in our pocket. And once we have the ranch, we can expand our operations, bring in more cattle, maybe even push into mining. The land is worth 10 times what Turner thinks it is." Silas Kane sipped his whiskey and nodded. And the woman, Clara Marcus, laughed coldly. She was always weak. Seeing her, brought so low having to work as a servant in someone else's house, that is satisfaction enough. Let her suffer. Let her watch as we take everything from Turner, just like I took everything from her. But Marcus had made a critical error. He had underestimated Clara Hale. He remembered her as the timid, defeated woman he had left behind. He did not know that she had been tempered by hardship, strengthened by survival. He did not know that she had found something worth fighting for. And he certainly did not know that Elias Turner was not the kind of man who gave up easily. Elias had survived the death of his wife, had raised his son alone, had built his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. He was not about to let some snake in an expensive suit take it all away. The battle lines had been drawn. The stakes were clear. And though neither side knew it yet, this conflict would test everyone involved in ways they could never have imagined. It would require courage, sacrifice, and the kind of love that refuses to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. But that was still to come. For now, as the first month of Clara's residence at the Turner Ranch came to a close, there was a moment of peace, a calm before the storm, a brief respite where two wounded souls and one innocent child could pretend just for a little while that they were a family, that they belonged together, that they had a future worth fighting for, and perhaps in pretending they were making it true. November came to Dry Creek Valley with a cold wind that stripped the last leaves from the cottonwood trees and sent them skittering across the frozen ground like lost souls searching for shelter. The sky turned the color of iron heavy with the promise of snow that would not fall for weeks yet, content instead to hover and threaten, keeping the world in a state of anxious anticipation. At the Turner Ranch, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, though everyone knew it was the calm that comes before violence. Clara rose each morning before dawn, lighting the stove and putting on coffee while the world outside was still dark and silent. She had come to love these quiet moments when the house was hers alone, and she could move through the rooms without fear or hesitation, claiming this space as her own. Elias and Tommy would emerge gradually, drawn by the smell of breakfast cooking. They had become her family in all the ways that mattered, though no one had spoken the word aloud. Tommy called her Miss Clara still, but there was love in his voice when he said it, and every night he asked her to tuck him in and tell him a story. And Elias, though he maintained a respectful distance, had begun to look at her in ways that made her heart beat faster, ways that suggested he saw not just a housekeeper or a caretaker, but a woman. The town, however, had not softened in its judgment. When Clara went to the general store for supplies, she could feel the stares, hear the whispers that followed her like a shadow. Marcus had been busy spreading his poison, telling anyone who would listen about his ungrateful former wife who had trapped a decent rancher in her web of lies and debts. Some people believed him. Others were simply entertained by the drama of it all. But there were a few who stood firm. Sarah Mackenzie, who ran the general store with her husband, continued to serve Clara with courtesy and even warmth, though she had to do so carefully aware that Marcus had eyes everywhere. Doc Harrison, who had known Elias for years and respected him, made it clear through subtle gestures that he supported Clara's place at the ranch. And Father O'Brien, who believed in redemption and second chances as a matter of faith, refused to let his parishioners speak ill of Clara in his presence. It was not much, but it was something. A few lights in the darkness. On a particularly cold morning in early November, Clara was hanging laundry when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of town. At first she thought nothing of it. Smoke was common enough in a place where every building had a wood stove or fireplace. But then she saw riders coming fast up the road toward the ranch, and her stomach clenched with premonition. It was Sarah Mackenzie and her husband, their faces grim with urgency. "Fire at the Johnsons' place," Sarah called out before she had even dismounted. "Started in the barn, spread to the house. They got out alive, but they lost everything. We are gathering supplies, food and clothing blankets. Can you spare anything?" "Of course," Clara said immediately. She ran into the house and began pulling together what she could, bread she had baked that morning, preserved vegetables from the cellar blankets, from the linen closet. Elias, hearing the commotion, came in from the barn. "What is happening?" "The Johnsons lost their home to fire," Clara explained quickly. We are gathering supplies to help them." Elias did not hesitate. "Take whatever you need. I will load up the wagon." Within an hour they had assembled a substantial collection of supplies. Tommy insisted on including some of his own toys, wooden horses he had carved with Elias's help, saying that the Johnson children would need something to play with. Clara felt a surge of pride at his generosity, this boy, who had been raised with such good values despite losing his mother so young. They drove into town together, the wagon laden with their offerings. The Johnson family was huddled in the church, wrapped in borrowed blankets, their faces streaked with soot and tears. When Clara approached with her arms full of supplies, Mrs. Johnson looked up with such raw gratitude that Clara had to turn away to hide her own tears. "Thank you," Mrs. Johnson whispered. "Thank you so much." Other families were arriving with their own contributions, and soon the church was filled with the organized chaos of a community coming together in crisis. It was one of the things Clara loved about the West, despite all its harshness and cruelty. When disaster struck, people forgot their petty grievances and remembered what it meant to be neighbors. But even in the midst of this good work, trouble was brewing. Clara was sorting through donated clothing when she overheard two women talking in low voices near the door. "I heard Marcus Hale saying it was no accident," one of them said. "He thinks Elias Turner might have had something to do with it to distract from his own legal troubles." "That is ridiculous," the other woman replied. "Elias Turner is the most honest man in this valley. He would never do such a thing." "Well, Marcus seemed awful certain, and you know how he is so charming and convincing, makes you wonder if there is something to it." Clara felt cold fury rising in her chest. This was Marcus's doing. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. He was spreading lies, sowing seeds of doubt, trying to isolate Elias and turn the community against him. It was exactly the kind of underhanded tactic Marcus excelled at. She wanted to march over to those women and tell them the truth about Marcus Hale, about the kind of man he really was. But she held her tongue, knowing that her words would carry no weight. She was still the barren woman, the broken one, the source of shame and scandal. Her testimony would only make things worse. When they finally returned to the ranch that evening, exhausted and smelling of smoke, Clara found she could not hold her fear inside any longer. "He is going to destroy us," she said to Elias once Tommy was in bed. "Marcus will not stop until he has taken everything from you, and it is all my fault for coming here." "It is not your fault," Elias said firmly. "Marcus is a snake, but snakes can be dealt with. Tomorrow we will ride into town and see Marshal Wyatt. We need to understand exactly what Marcus is claiming and what evidence he has. Knowledge is power, Clara. Once we know what we are up against, we can figure out how to fight it." The next morning they left Tommy in the care of Sarah Mackenzie and rode together to the marshal's office. Wyatt greeted them with a grave expression that did nothing to ease Clara's anxiety. "I was hoping you would come," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "I have been doing some investigating into Marcus Hale's claims, and what I have found is troubling." He laid several papers on his desk. "This is the promissory note Marcus claims Clara signed, agreeing to repay debts incurred during their marriage. The signature looks legitimate, and the dates match up with when they were married." Clara leaned forward to examine the document, and her face went pale. "That is not my signature," she said. "I mean, it looks like my handwriting, but I never signed this. I never agreed to any such debt." "Are you certain?" Marshal Wyatt asked. "Absolutely certain. Marcus must have forged it, somehow traced my signature from some other document." "That is what I suspected," Wyatt said. "But proving forgery is not easy, especially when the person who supposedly signed the document is the ex-wife making accusations. A judge, particularly one who might be sympathetic to Marcus, could easily dismiss your claims as bitterness and vindictiveness." "What about Judge Harrison?" Elias asked. Marcus claimed he had already spoken to him. Marshal Wyatt's expression darkened. "Harrison is corrupt. We all know it, even if we cannot prove it. If Marcus has gotten to him with bribes or promises, then any case that goes before him is already decided." We would need to find a way to remove Harrison from the case or prove that Marcus's claims are false beyond any doubt. "How do we do that?" Clara asked, though she already felt the weight of hopelessness settling on her shoulders. "We need evidence," Wyatt said. "Documents, witnesses, anything that can prove Marcus is lying. Do you have any papers from your marriage? Any records that might contradict what he is claiming?" Clara shook her head miserably. "Marcus kept all of that. When he left, he took everything with him. I have nothing." They sat in heavy silence, the enormity of their situation pressing down on them. Marcus had planned this carefully, covering his tracks, making sure Clara had no way to defend herself. It was masterful in its cruelty. "There might be one thing," Marshal Wyatt said slowly. "When Marcus and Clara divorced, there would have been legal proceedings, papers filed with the court. If those papers make no mention of any debts Clara supposedly owed, it would cast serious doubt on Marcus's current claims. But those records are kept at the courthouse, and with Judge Harrison in Marcus's pocket, getting access to them will not be easy." "I could try," Clara said suddenly. "The clerk at the courthouse, Mr. Peterson, he always treated me kindly. Maybe if I asked him directly explain the situation, he would let me see the divorce records." "It is worth a try," Wyatt agreed. "But be careful. If Marcus finds out you are investigating, he might move faster to press his claims." They left the marshal's office with a plan fragile as it was, but it was more than they had before. Clara felt a spark of something that might have been hope, the first she had felt since Marcus's return. On their way back to pick up Tommy, they stopped by the creek to let the horses drink. It was a beautiful spot, sheltered by willow trees, the water running clear and cold over smooth stones. For a moment they could pretend they were just two people enjoying a peaceful afternoon with no threats hanging over their heads. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for believing me, for standing by me when everyone else thinks I am just a bitter ex-wife making trouble." "I know you," Elias replied. "I have seen your character, your kindness, your strength. Whatever Marcus claims, I know the truth of who you are. That is not something anyone can take away." Tommy appeared then, running down from the Mackenzie house, his face lit with excitement. "Pa, Miss Clara, I helped Mrs. Mackenzie make cookies, and she let me eat 3. His innocent joy was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Clara caught him up in a hug, and for a moment the three of them stood together by the creek, a family in everything but name, drawing strength from each other for the battles that lay ahead. That night disaster struck in the form of fire and malice. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Tommy's screams. She ran from her room to find flames licking at the walls of the barn, spreading with terrifying speed. Elias was already outside trying to get the horses out, and Clara did not hesitate. She grabbed Tommy and held him tight. "It is all right," she said, forcing calm into her voice, even as her heart hammered with terror. "We are safe. I promise you we are safe." Together she and Elias fought the fire, hauling bucket after bucket of water from the well, beating at the flames with wet blankets. By the time they finally got it under control, the barn was badly damaged, and they were both exhausted and covered in soot. "This was no accident," Elias said grimly, examining the remains. "Someone set this deliberately. You can see where it started in 3 different places. This was arson." "Marcus," Clara whispered. "Most likely, or someone he paid to do it. This is a message, a warning of what he can do if we do not give in to his demands." Tommy, who had been watching with wide, frightened eyes, suddenly burst into tears. Clara immediately knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. "It is all right, sweetheart. The fire is out. We are all safe. Nobody got hurt, and that is what matters." "But what if they come back?" Tommy sobbed. "What if next time they burn the house?" "They will not," Clara said with a conviction she did not entirely feel. "Because we are not going to let them. We are going to stand together and fight. Your father and I, we are not going to let anyone hurt this family." It was the first time she had used that word family in reference to the 3 of them. Tommy looked up at her with tear-streaked face, and something in his expression shifted. He nodded, trusting her completely, believing in her promise, with the absolute faith of childhood. That trust that faith gave Clara something she had not had in a long time. It gave her courage. The morning after the fire, Elias made a decision. He saddled his horse and rode into town with Clara, leaving Tommy in the care of Doc Harrison's wife, a formidable woman who could be trusted to keep the boy safe. They went straight to the marshal's office, where Wyatt listened grimly to their account of the arson. "I will investigate," he promised. "But without witnesses or evidence directly connecting Marcus to the fire, there is little I can legally do. He is too smart to have done it himself, and whoever he paid will not talk." "Then what do we do?" Clara asked, frustration evident in her voice. "You do what we discussed. You try to get those divorce records from the courthouse. It is not much, but it is all we have right now." Clara went to the courthouse alone, her heart pounding with anxiety. The clerk, Mr. Peterson, was a thin, nervous man who had always seemed kind, but easily intimidated. When Clara explained what she needed, his face went pale. "Miss Clara, I cannot just hand over court records. There are procedures forms that need to be filled out, approval from the judge." "Please," Clara said, putting every ounce of sincerity she could into her voice. "I am not asking you to do anything improper. These are records of my own divorce. I have a right to see them. And, Mr. Peterson, you know Marcus Hale. You know what kind of man he is. He is trying to take everything from me and from Elias Turner, and he is using forged documents to do it. I just need to see the original divorce papers, just to see if there is any mention of debts in them." Mr. Peterson looked around nervously, as if expecting Marcus to appear at any moment. Then he made a decision. "Wait here," he said quietly. He disappeared into the back room where records were kept. Clara waited each second, feeling like an eternity, her hands clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. Finally, Peterson returned with a folder. "5 minutes," he said. "That is all I can give you. If anyone asks, I never showed you these." Clara opened the folder with trembling hands and began to read through the divorce decree. It was painful seeing the legal dissolution of her marriage laid out in cold legal language, but she forced herself to focus, scanning through each page looking for any mention of debts or financial obligations. There was nothing. Not one word about Clara owing Marcus money. The divorce had been granted on grounds of her failure to produce children, but there was no mention of financial matters beyond the standard division of property, which had left Clara with virtually nothing. "This is it," Clara breathed. "This proves Marcus is lying. The divorce decree makes no mention of any debts." "You need to make a copy," Peterson said urgently. "I have paper and ink here. Quickly, before someone comes." Clara's hands shook as she copied down the relevant passages, making sure to note the date and case number. When she was done, Peterson took back the folder and disappeared into the back room again. Clara tucked her notes into her dress pocket, her heart soaring with hope. She practically ran back to where Elias was waiting with the horses. "I found it," she said breathlessly. "I found proof. The divorce papers make no mention of any debts. Marcus's promissory note is a complete fabrication." For the first time in weeks, Elias smiled. "Then we have him. We take this to Marshal Wyatt, have him confront Marcus with the evidence. Even Judge Harrison will have trouble ignoring clear proof of forgery." They rode back to the marshal's office, hope building with every step. But when they arrived, they found Wyatt in conversation with 2 men Clara did not recognize. One was tall and weathered, with the look of a professional lawman. The other was younger, dressed in the clothes of a ranch hand, but carrying himself with the coiled tension of someone accustomed to violence. "Elias, Clara," Wyatt said, his tone carefully neutral. "These men are here on behalf of Silas Kane. They are serving notice that Kane has purchased the debt Marcus claims Clara owes him, and they are here to collect." The tall man stepped forward. "I am Garrett Ross, representative for Mr. Kane. We understand that Mrs. Hale is currently employed at your ranch, Mr. Turner. Since she cannot pay her debts, we are authorized to place a lien on your property in the amount of $5,000. "That is absurd," Elias said flatly. "Clara owes no such debt. We have proof right here that Marcus Hale's claims are fraudulent. He reached for the papers Clara had copied, but Garrett Ross did not even look at them. "That is a matter for the courts to decide. We have a signed promissory note and a court order from Judge Harrison authorizing the lien. Unless you can pay the full amount immediately, we will be filing the necessary paperwork this afternoon." "Judge Harrison has no authority to issue such an order based on disputed claims," Marshal Wyatt interjected. "This is highly irregular." "Nevertheless, the order is legal and binding. We are simply here to inform Mr. Turner of the situation. Good day, gentlemen. Ma'am." They left, and Clara felt the hope that had been building inside her crumble into dust. Even with proof of Marcus's lies, the corruption ran too deep. Judge Harrison had already ruled in Marcus's favor, and overturning that would require appeals that could take months. Months they did not have. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice small and defeated. Marshal Wyatt ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "We need time. Time to build a proper case, time to find more evidence, time to possibly get a different judge involved. But time is exactly what Marcus and Cain are not giving us." "Then we fight," Elias said simply. "We do not pay. We do not surrender. We fight this in court and in the community. We make noise. We tell everyone who will listen what Marcus is doing. We turn public opinion against him." "That is dangerous," Wyatt warned. "Marcus has resources and connections. If you push him too hard, there is no telling what he might do." "He already burned my barn," Elias replied. "What more can he do?" Clara knew the answer to that, though she did not speak it aloud. Marcus could do much, much more. He could destroy reputations, turn friends into enemies, make life unlivable. She had experienced it all firsthand. But looking at Elias's determined face, seeing the set of his jaw and the fire in his eyes, she felt her own resolve harden. She was tired of running, tired of being a victim. If they were going to go down, they would go down fighting. That afternoon they picked up Tommy and returned to the ranch. The burned barn stood as a stark reminder of what they were up against, but Elias refused to let it intimidate him. He immediately began making plans to rebuild, ordering lumber, organizing work crews. If Marcus thought one fire would break his spirit, he was badly mistaken. Over the next several days, something unexpected began to happen. Word of the fire and of Marcus's machinations had spread through the community, and not everyone was pleased with what they heard. Sarah Mackenzie was the first to speak up publicly, telling anyone who came into her store that she did not believe a word of Marcus Hale's claims, and that Clara was one of the finest women she had ever known. Doc Harrison, emboldened by his wife's fierce support, began making inquiries of his own, talking to people who had known Marcus during his marriage to Clara. What he heard confirmed his suspicions. Marcus had always been charming on the surface, but cruel underneath, the kind of man who measured his own worth by how thoroughly he could dominate those weaker than himself. Even Father O'Brien got involved, though he had to be careful not to violate the sanctity of confession. He nevertheless made it clear in his Sunday sermon that the community had a moral obligation to stand against injustice and corruption regardless of who the perpetrators might be. But perhaps the most surprising support came from an unexpected source. Late one evening, as Clara was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Elias answered it to find Silas Cain standing on the porch alone and unarmed, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. "I need to talk to you," Cain said, "and to Mrs. Hale." Elias's first instinct was to slam the door in the man's face, but something in Cain's expression gave him pause. He stepped aside and let Cain enter, though he kept himself positioned between the visitor and Clara. Cain took off his hat and turned it in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "I am not a good man," he began. "I have done things I am not proud of, hurt people who did not deserve it. But I am not without principles. And what Marcus Hale is doing, it crosses a line even for me." "Why are you telling us this?" Clara asked, her voice wary. "Because he lied to me. Marcus told me you had legitimately defaulted on debts and that Turner was harboring you to avoid payment. He said it was a simple matter of collecting what was owed. But I have been asking questions, and what I have learned paints a very different picture. That promissory note is a forgery, is it not? Clara nodded. I never signed it. I never owed Marcus anything. Kane swore under his breath. I suspected as much. Marcus is using me to do his dirty work, making me the face of his vengeance while he stays clean. I do not appreciate being used. So what are you proposing? Elias asked. I am going to withdraw my claim on your property. I will tell Judge Harrison that upon further investigation I have determined the debt is invalid. It will not stop Marcus. He will just find another way to come at you, but it will buy you time. Why would you do this? Clara asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. Kane met her eyes directly. Because I have a daughter about your age, and if some man had treated her the way Marcus treated you, I would want someone to stand up for her. Consider this my attempt at redemption, small as it may be. He put his hat back on and moved toward the door. One more thing. Marcus is planning something big. I do not know the details, but he has been meeting with men, bad men, the kind you hire when you want violence done. Whatever he is planning, it will happen soon. Be ready. And with that warning, Silas Kane walked out into the night, leaving Elias and Clara staring after him in stunned silence. Do you believe him? Clara asked. I think so, Elias replied. A man like Kane, he has his own code. Twisted as it may be, there are lines he will not cross, and I think Marcus just pushed him across one of them. So what do we do? Elias pulled Clara close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that was both protective and intimate. We prepare, we gather our allies, and we make sure that when Marcus makes his move, we are ready for him. Clara let herself lean into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had found each other in the darkness, determined not to be separated by the storms that raged around them. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A group of ranchers and townspeople, led by Sarah Mackenzie and Doc Harrison, arrived at the Turner Ranch. They carried tools and lumber, food, and supplies. We are here to help rebuild your barn, Sarah announced, and to let you know that you are not alone in this fight. Marcus Hale may have money and influence, but he does not have this community. Not anymore. Elias was speechless, his throat tight with emotion. Clara, standing beside him with Tommy's hand in hers, felt tears streaming down her face. This was what she had lost when Marcus had destroyed her reputation, this sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself. And now, miraculously, it was being restored. The barn raising took all day. Men worked side by side, raising walls and hammering beams, while women organized food and drink, making sure everyone was fed and cared for. Children ran and played Tommy among them, his laughter ringing out clear and joyful. It was a celebration as much as a construction project, a declaration that this community would not be divided by Marcus Hale's schemes. As the sun began to set, the new barn stood completed, not as large or grand as the old one, but solid and functional, a testament to what people could accomplish when they worked together. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu music filled the air. People danced in the fading light, their joy a defiance against the darkness that threatened them all. Clara found herself pulled into a dance by Elias, who moved with surprising grace despite his size. As they spun together under the emerging stars, she felt something shift inside her, some final wall coming down. She looked up into his face and saw not just kindness and protection, but love, real and undeniable. Elias, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. I know, he said softly, pulling her closer. I know. They did not need more words. The understanding passed between them in that moment, a promise without speech, a commitment made in the language of hearts rather than tongues. But even as joy filled the ranch that evening, darkness gathered in the town of Dry Creek Valley. Marcus Hale sat in his room above the saloon, his face twisted with rage, as he listened to reports of the barn raising of the community coming together to support Clara and Elias. Everything he had planned was unraveling, and he would not stand for it. "Enough," he said to the men gathered around him, hired guns and thugs who cared nothing for justice or morality, only for the money Marcus paid them. "Tomorrow we end this. We take the ranch by force if necessary. Turner will sell to me or he will lose everything. And Clara, that worthless woman, she will finally learn what it means to defy me." The men nodded, checking their weapons, preparing for violence. They did not care about the rightness or wrongness of what they were doing. They were tools, instruments of Marcus's will, and they would do what they were paid to do without question or conscience. The stage was set for confrontation. On one side, a community coming together to protect its own, driven by principles of justice and compassion. On the other, a man consumed by bitterness and greed, willing to use any means necessary to achieve his ends. And caught in the middle, Clara Hale, a woman who had been called broken, but who was discovering that sometimes the broken places are where the light gets in. Tomorrow would bring the storm. Tonight there was only the music and the dancing and the sweet, fragile hope that love might be enough to overcome hate. December arrived in Montana territory with a vengeance, bringing with it winds that cut like knives and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the horse troughs froze solid overnight. The world turned hard and unforgiving, as if nature itself was testing the resolve of those who dared to make their lives in this unforgiving land. But inside the Turner Ranch there was warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. The weeks following the barn raising had brought changes both subtle and profound. The community's support had not wavered despite Marcus's attempts to sow discord and doubt. If anything, his increasingly desperate tactics had only strengthened the resolve of those who stood with Elias and Clara. People who had once whispered about the barren woman now spoke her name with respect, recognizing in her story not shame but courage, not failure but perseverance. Clara herself had transformed in ways that surprised even her. The hollow-eyed woman who had stood in the rain outside the general store just 3 months ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more certain of her place in the world. She moved through the ranch house with purpose, now making decisions without second-guessing herself, speaking her mind without fear of judgment. She had found not just a home, but a self she had not known existed. And Elias, watching her bloom like a late-season flower, felt his heart opening in ways he had thought impossible after Sarah's death. He had loved his wife with the fierce devotion of youth, and her loss had nearly destroyed him. He had believed that kind of love came only once in a lifetime. But what he felt for Clara was different, not lesser, but other, a love built not on the passion of discovery, but on the deeper foundation of shared struggle, mutual respect, and the quiet recognition of kindred spirits who had both known profound loss. They had not spoken of their feelings, not in explicit words, but there were moments small and precious that revealed the truth more clearly than any declaration. The way Elias's hand would linger on Clara's shoulder when he passed her in the kitchen. The way Clara would watch Elias working in the fields, her eyes soft with an emotion she was only beginning to name. The way they both looked at Tommy, seeing in his happiness the family they were building together. Tommy himself seemed to sense the change in the air, though he lacked the vocabulary to articulate it. He had taken to drawing pictures of the three of them together, always standing close, always smiling. He would present these drawings to Clara with solemn ceremony, and she would hang them on the wall as if they were masterpieces, which, in a way, they were masterpieces of innocence and hope, and the simple belief that love could conquer all obstacles. But obstacles remained formidable and dangerous. Marcus had been quieter in recent weeks, but it was the quiet of a predator stalking its prey, calculating the perfect moment to strike. Marshal Wyatt had warned them that Marcus was meeting with men of questionable character, hiring guns and making plans. Silas Kane's withdrawal from the debt claim had bought them time, but it had also enraged Marcus, pushing him toward more extreme measures. On a particularly cold morning in mid-December, Elias made a decision that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He found Clara in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, with the steady rhythm of someone who had done the task 1,000 times. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying a seriousness that made her look up immediately, "I want to teach you to shoot." She blinked in surprise. "Shoot? You mean a gun?" "Yes. If Marcus is planning something, if he comes here with men willing to use violence, I need to know you can protect yourself and Tommy. I am not saying it will come to that, but I want you prepared just in case." Clara set down the dough, wiping flour from her hands. She had never held a gun in her life, had been raised to believe that such things were the province of men, that a proper woman need never concern herself with weapons or violence. But she was not that woman anymore. She was someone new, someone who had learned that survival sometimes required doing things you never imagined you could do. "All right," she said simply. "Teach me." They went out to a clear area behind the house where Elias had set up targets, simple wooden posts with circles painted on them. Tommy watched from the porch, bundled in his winter coat, his eyes wide with excitement at seeing Miss Clara learn to shoot. Elias started with the basics, showing Clara how to hold the revolver, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it. His hands were gentle as he adjusted her grip, his body close behind hers as he helped her line up the shot. Clara was acutely aware of his nearness, of the warmth of him against her back, of the way his breath stirred her hair when he spoke. "Now," he said softly, his voice right by her ear, "take a breath, let half of it out, and squeeze." The gun bucked in her hands with more force than she had expected, and the shot went wide, missing the target completely, but Clara did not flinch or cry out. She simply steadied herself and tried again. By the end of an hour, she was hitting the target more often than not. She would never be a sharpshooter, but she could defend herself if necessary, and that was all that mattered. Elias watched her with undisguised pride, seeing in her determination yet another reason to love this remarkable woman who had come into his life when he needed her most. That evening, after Tommy had been put to bed, Clara and Elias sat together by the fire. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and finding every crack in the walls, but inside there was warmth and light and a sense of peace that felt almost sacred. "I never imagined my life would lead here," Clara said softly, staring into the flames. "When Marcus left me, when the town turned against me, I thought my story was over. I thought I would live out my days alone, doing whatever work I could find existing, but not really living. And now look at me. I have a home, a family, a reason to wake up in the morning. It feels like a miracle." Elias reached over and took her hand, his rough palm engulfing her smaller one. "I did not bring you here to fix us," he said, echoing words he had spoken before, but which bore repeating. "But somehow you did. This house was just a structure before you came. Now it is a home. Tommy was a happy child, but now he is thriving. And me, I was surviving, going through the motions of living. But you have given me something I thought I had lost forever. You have given me hope." Clara turned to look at him, and in the firelight his face was all planes and shadows, strong and gentle at once. "Maybe we fixed each other," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Elias leaned closer, and Clara did not pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tentative and sure a question, and an answer, a promise of what might be. When they finally drew apart, Clara was crying, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so profound it hurt. "I love you," Elias said the words simple and true. "I know it has only been a few months. I know people will say it is too fast, but I do not care what anyone thinks. I love you, Clara Hale, and I want you to be my wife. Not because Tommy needs a mother, though he does, not because I need help running the ranch, though I do, but because I love you for who you are, for your strength and your kindness and your refusal to give up even when the whole world was against you." Clara could not speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded and nodded again, and then threw her arms around Elias's neck and held on as if she would never let go. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while outside the winter wind sang its lonely song, and inside their hearts sang something far sweeter. The next morning brought unexpected news. Marshal Wyatt rode out to the ranch, his face grim with purpose. He found Elias and Clara in the barn feeding the horses, moving with the easy coordination of people who had learned to work as a team. "I have good news and bad news," Wyatt announced without preamble. "The good news is I have been conducting a thorough investigation into Marcus Hale's business dealings, and I have found evidence of multiple fraudulent transactions, forged documents, falsified records, intimidation of witnesses, enough to bring criminal charges and invalidate all his civil claims against you." "That is wonderful," Clara exclaimed. "So what is the bad news?" "The bad news is that before I can make any of this official, it has to go through the proper legal channels. That means a hearing before Judge Harrison, who we know is in Marcus's pocket. And it means giving Marcus advance notice of the charges, which will give him time to cover his tracks or intimidate more witnesses or disappear entirely. The legal system moves slowly, and Marcus knows how to manipulate it." "How slowly?" Elias asked. "We are looking at weeks, possibly months, before this goes to trial, and in the meantime Marcus is free to continue his harassment. I am doing everything I can to expedite the process, but my hands are somewhat tied by the law." "So what do we do?" Clara asked. Wyatt looked between them, his expression troubled. "You prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Keep your doors locked. Stay alert. Do not go anywhere alone. Marcus is getting desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. I will do my best to keep an eye on him, but I cannot be everywhere at once." After the marshal left, Clara and Elias stood together in the cold morning air, watching their breath fog in front of them. The weight of the situation pressed down on them, but they did not break. They had been through too much, come too far to surrender now. The days that followed were tense with waiting. Christmas approached, and Clara threw herself into preparing for it with almost frantic energy. She baked cookies and pies, strung popcorn garlands, helped Tommy make paper decorations to hang around the house. It was as if by creating joy, she could keep the darkness at bay, at least for a little while. On Christmas Eve, they attended services at the church. The building was packed with people seeking comfort and community in the cold heart of winter. Father O'Brien delivered a sermon about hope and redemption, about how the darkest night comes just before the dawn, about how God's love finds us even in our most broken moments. Clara listened with tears streaming down her face, feeling every word in her bones. After the service, people lingered to talk and share good wishes. Sarah Mackenzie pressed a package into Clara's hands, refusing to say what it contained, but insisting it be opened on Christmas morning. Doc Harrison shook Elias's hand and told him he was proud of how he had handled the situation with Marcus, that he was setting an example of integrity for the whole community. Even people who had once shunned Clara now greeted her, warmly acknowledging through their kindness that they had been wrong to judge her so harshly. It was a beautiful evening, full of light and warmth, despite the bitter cold outside. But as they rode back to the ranch, Elias could not shake a feeling of unease. Everything was going too well. Marcus had been too quiet for too long. Something was coming. He could feel it like a storm on the horizon. That night, after Tommy had gone to sleep clutching his new wooden horse that Elias had carved for him, Clara and Elias sat by the fire once more. The Christmas tree, a small pine that Tommy had helped select and cut down, stood in the corner, decorated with their humble ornaments and radiating a sense of peace. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Clara said softly. "Maybe the best Christmas I have ever had. Not because of presents or fancy decorations, but because of this. Being here with you and Tommy, being part of a family. It is everything I thought I had lost forever." Elias pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Every good thing in my life right now is because of you. You have given me back my joy, Clara. You have made me remember what it feels like to hope for the future instead of just enduring the present." "I love you," Clara whispered the words still new enough to feel momentous every time she said them. I love you too, more than I have words to express." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. Outside, snow began to fall soft and silent, covering the world in a blanket of white. It was peaceful, almost magical, a Christmas Eve that felt like something out of a storybook. But in the town of Dry Creek Valley, Marcus Hale was not feeling peaceful or magical. He sat in his room drinking whiskey and nursing his rage, watching the snow fall and thinking about all the ways Clara and Elias had humiliated him. His plans had fallen apart. His allies had abandoned him. His schemes had been exposed. He had become a laughingstock, the man who could not break one woman and one stubborn rancher. It was intolerable. It was unacceptable. And it was about to end. "Tomorrow," he said to the men gathered in his room, rough characters who smelled of tobacco and violence. "Tomorrow we ride out to the Turner Ranch and we settle this once and for all. If Turner will not sell, we will take the land by force. And if Clara gets hurt in the process, well, that is just unfortunate collateral damage." The men grinned and nodded, checking their guns and knives, anticipating the violence to come. They did not care about Marcus's grievances or his wounded pride. They cared about the money he was paying them and the opportunity to hurt people without consequences. They were predators, plain and simple, and Marcus had unleashed them. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off fresh snow, in a way that made the whole world look new and pure. Tommy woke early, as children do on Christmas, and ran to Clara's room to wake her up. She emerged, sleepy and smiling, wrapping herself in a robe and following the excited boy downstairs. Elias was already up, stoking the fire and putting on coffee. He turned when he heard them coming and smiled at the sight of Clara, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face soft with sleep. She looked beautiful and vulnerable and completely at home, and his heart swelled with love for her. They opened presents together, the few simple gifts they could afford made precious by the love with which they were given. Tommy received a new jacket from Clara, carefully sewn from fabric she had purchased with money saved from her small wages. He also got a book of stories from Elias, and he clutched it to his chest as if it were made of gold. For Clara there was a shawl from Elias, warm and beautifully made, purchased from a traveling merchant weeks ago, and hidden away until this moment. And for Elias, Clara had knitted a scarf in the long winter evenings, every stitch made with care and love. They ate a special breakfast of pancakes and bacon, and Tommy chattered excitedly about all the things he wanted to do that day. It was perfect, a moment of pure happiness, untainted by worry or fear. They were a family in every way that mattered, bound not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the determination to stand together no matter what came. But what came riding hard across the snow-covered valley was violence and vengeance in the form of Marcus Hale and his hired guns. They heard the horses before they saw them, a thunder of hoofbeats that shattered the peaceful Christmas morning like a rock through glass. Elias was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he kept by the door. Clara, seeing his face go hard with determination, grabbed Tommy and pulled him close. "Take him upstairs," Elias said quietly, his voice steady despite the danger approaching. "Lock the door and stay away from the windows. No matter what happens, do not come down until I tell you it is safe." "Elias, no," Clara protested. "I am not leaving you to face them alone. You have to protect Tommy. That is the most important thing right now. Please, Clara, trust me." Their eyes met for a long moment, a lifetime of love and understanding passing between them in that single glance. Then Clara nodded and shepherded Tommy toward the stairs. The boy was frightened now, the excitement of Christmas morning forgotten in the face of real danger. "It will be all right," Clara told him, forcing confidence into her voice. "Your father will handle this. We just need to stay up here and be brave." They reached the upstairs bedroom just as the riders arrived. Through the window, Clara could see them, 8 men on horseback, all armed, all with the hard faces of men accustomed to violence. And at their head, looking almost civilized in his expensive coat and hat, was Marcus Hale. Downstairs, Elias opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. He stood tall and steady, showing no fear despite being outnumbered and outgunned. He had been a soldier once, long ago, before settling in Montana. He knew how to face death without flinching. "Marcus," he said evenly, "this is private property. State your business or leave." Marcus dismounted with theatrical flourish, a sneer playing at his lips. "My business is with you, Turner, and with my dear former wife. I have tried to be reasonable, tried to settle this through legal channels, but you have forced my hand. I am here to make you a final offer. Sell me your ranch for a fair price, and all of this unpleasantness can end. Refuse, and things will get very difficult for you." "I am not selling," Elias said flatly. "Not to you, not to anyone. This land is mine, legally purchased and paid for. You have no claim on it, despite all your lies and forged documents." "Ah, yes, those documents. I understand Marshal Wyatt has been asking questions about them. Very inconvenient. But you see, Turner, the law is slow, and I am not patient. I want what I want, and I want it now. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to sign a bill of sale transferring this property to me. In exchange, I will leave quietly, and you can go on with your miserable little life somewhere else." "And if I refuse?" Marcus's smile widened. "Then my associates here will persuade you. They can be very convincing when properly motivated." The hired guns shifted in their saddles' hands, moving toward their weapons. The threat was explicit and immediate. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, calculating odds that were not in his favor. 8 against 1. He could take down maybe 2 before they killed him. Not good enough. But he was not alone. Not anymore. From the direction of the road came the sound of more horses, many more horses. Elias and Marcus both turned to look, and what they saw changed everything. A group of riders was approaching, at least 20 strong, led by Marshal Wyatt, and behind them came wagons carrying more people, men and women, of Dry Creek Valley, armed with whatever weapons they could find, united in their determination to stand against injustice. Sarah Mackenzie was there, riding beside her husband, a shotgun across her saddle. Doc Harrison came next, his medical bag strapped to his horse, but a pistol at his hip. Father O'Brien rode with them unarmed, but lending the moral weight of his presence to the cause. And there were others, ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and laborers, people who had decided that enough was enough, that Marcus Hale's reign of intimidation and corruption had to end. Marshal Wyatt rode up to the porch and dismounted, positioning himself between Elias and Marcus's gang. His badge caught the winter sunlight, a symbol of law and order in a moment that threatened to descend into chaos. "Marcus Hale," he said loudly, his voice carrying authority, "I am placing you under arrest for fraud, forgery, intimidation of witnesses, and conspiracy to commit violence. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will exercise it. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd, at the determined faces and ready weapons, and for the first time fear flickered in his eyes. His hired guns, seeing the odds turn dramatically against them, began to edge their horses backward, wanting no part of a fight they could not win. "You cannot arrest me," Marcus blustered, but the confidence had drained from his voice. "I have done nothing illegal. I have court orders, legal documents." "You have forgeries and lies," Wyatt replied, "and I have witnesses willing to testify to your crimes. It is over, Marcus. Your schemes have failed. Your corruption has been exposed, and the people of this community have decided they will not stand for it anymore." "This is outrageous. Judge Harrison will hear about this. Judge Harrison is currently being investigated by territorial authorities for accepting bribes and perverting the course of justice," Wyatt said calmly. "I sent them all the evidence I gathered about his dealings with you. He will not be in a position to help anyone for quite some time." The color drained from Marcus's face as the full enormity of his defeat sank in. Everything he had built, all his carefully laid plans, were crumbling to dust. And worse than the legal consequences, worse than the possibility of prison, was the public humiliation. He had been exposed before the entire community as a fraud and a coward, a man who could only win through lies and intimidation. "What about them?" Elias asked, gesturing to the hired guns. "They came here ready to commit violence." "Gentlemen," Marshal Wyatt said, addressing the nervous gunman, "you have a choice. You can ride out of Dry Creek Valley right now and never come back, or you can stay and face charges as accessories to Mr. Hale's crimes. I strongly suggest you choose the first option." The men did not need to be told twice. They turned their horses and rode away at speed, wanting to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the trouble they had almost walked into. Within moments they were gone, leaving Marcus standing alone and defeated. Wyatt moved forward with handcuffs, but before he could reach Marcus, the door of the ranch house burst open. Clara came running out, her face flushed with emotion, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that made her beautiful in a fierce, terrible way. "Wait," she called out. "Before you take him away, I have something to say." She walked down the porch steps and stood facing Marcus. This man who had destroyed her life, who had tried to break her spirit, who had sought to punish her for something that was never her fault. For a moment she just looked at him, seeing not a monster, but a small petty man whose own inadequacy had driven him to cruelty. "I was told I was broken because I could not have children," Clara said, her voice strong and clear, carrying to everyone assembled. "You told me that, Marcus, you and the doctors and half the town. You made me believe that my worth as a woman, as a human being, was measured only by my ability to produce heirs. And when I failed that test, you threw me away like something without value." She paused, gathering her thoughts, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. But she was not afraid any more. She had found her voice, and she would use it. "But I was never broken. You broke me, Marcus. You took away my dignity, my self-respect, my place in society. You used me and discarded me, and tried to make sure I would never find happiness again. But you failed. Because Elias Turner saw me not as a broken thing to be pitied or scorned, but as a person worthy of love and respect. This family gave me purpose. They gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. They gave me back my life." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. "You wanted to punish me for disappointing you, but in trying to destroy me, you only showed everyone here who you really are. A cruel, vindictive man who measures his worth by his ability to dominate and control others. Well, I am done being afraid of you. I am done letting you define who I am. You have no power over me anymore, Marcus. None at all." The silence that followed her words was profound. Every person present had been moved by her testimony, seeing in her courage something noble and true. Even some who had once judged her harshly now felt shame for their part in her suffering. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What could he say? She had spoken truth, simple and devastating, and there was no argument that could refute it, no clever manipulation that could twist it to his advantage. He had been defeated, not just legally, but morally exposed before the community he had tried to manipulate. Marshal Wyatt stepped forward and cuffed Marcus's hands behind his back. "Marcus Hale, you are under arrest. You will be held in jail pending trial. Given the severity of the charges and your obvious flight risk, I do not expect bail to be granted." As Wyatt led Marcus away, the assembled crowd erupted in applause. People rushed forward to congratulate Clara and Elias, to shake their hands and offer words of support and encouragement. Sarah Mackenzie hugged Clara tightly, whispering that she was the bravest woman in Montana Territory. Doc Harrison pumped Elias's hand and declared that justice had finally been served. Father O'Brien blessed them both and thanked God for delivering them from evil. Tommy, who had been watching from the upstairs window, came running down and threw himself into Clara's arms. She caught him up and held him close, burying her face in his hair, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. "Is it really over?" Tommy asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara assured him. "It is really over. We are safe now, all of us. The community stayed for hours, turning what had begun as a confrontation into an impromptu celebration. Food was brought out shared among friends and neighbors. Stories were told, laughter rang out across the snow-covered valley. It was more than just relief at the end of a threat. It was a reaffirmation of the values that bound them together, a declaration that they would stand for justice and compassion over greed and cruelty. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, people finally began to depart, heading back to their own homes and families. Sarah Mackenzie was the last to leave, pausing to give Clara one more hug. "You did good today," she said warmly. "Speaking your truth like that, standing up for yourself, you made us all proud. And you showed every woman in this valley that we do not have to accept the labels men try to put on us. We define ourselves." After everyone had gone, Elias and Clara stood together on the porch watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. Tommy was inside, finally opening the rest of his Christmas presents, his fear forgotten in the joy of normalcy restored. "You were magnificent today," Elias said softly. "The way you spoke to Marcus, the strength in your words. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life." "I could not have done it without you," Clara replied. "Without this family. You gave me the courage to stand up for myself. You taught me that I am worth fighting for." Elias turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Clara Hale, I asked you once before, but circumstances intervened. So I am asking again properly this time. Will you marry me? Not because of duty or convenience or necessity, but because I love you with my whole heart, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you be my wife?" Clara's smile was radiant, brighter than all the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Elias Turner. I will marry you. I will be your wife and Tommy's mother, and we will build a life together, the three of us. A real family. The family I always dreamed of, but thought I would never have." They kissed, then a long, deep kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. When they finally drew apart, both were crying, but they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of the overwhelming relief that comes when a long battle finally ends in victory. Inside the house, Tommy looked up from his toys and saw them through the window, silhouetted against the twilight, holding each other close. He smiled, a child's innocent smile that reflected his complete trust in the adults who loved him. Everything was right with his world. His father was happy. Miss Clara was staying forever. They were a family. And he was exactly right. The trial of Marcus Hale took place in January of 1888, with a new judge brought in from the territorial capital to ensure impartiality. The proceedings were straightforward, almost anticlimactic after all the drama that had preceded them. The evidence of Marcus's crimes was overwhelming, documented in ledgers and testimony, and the forged promissory note that Clara had never signed. Marcus was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison, with additional penalties requiring him to make full restitution to Clara for the hardship he had caused her. He was also permanently barred from doing business in Montana Territory. His reputation, once so carefully cultivated, was destroyed beyond any hope of repair. Silas Kane, true to his word, testified against Marcus, providing crucial evidence about the scheme to seize the Turner Ranch. In exchange for his cooperation, the charges against him were reduced and he was given a suspended sentence with the requirement that he leave Montana Territory and never return. He departed quietly, his own reputation tarnished but his freedom preserved. Judge Harrison was removed from the bench and charged with corruption. His trial was still pending, but few doubted he would end up in prison alongside Marcus. The territorial authorities, embarrassed by the scandal, promised reforms to prevent such abuse of power in the future. Through it all, Clara sat in the courtroom with Elias beside her, holding her hand, lending her his strength. She testified calmly and clearly about Marcus's treatment of her, about the lies he had told, and the documents he had forged. She did not embellish or exaggerate. She simply told the truth, and the truth was damning enough. When the guilty verdict was announced, Clara felt no triumph, no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall. She felt only a quiet sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending, so a new one could begin. Justice had been served not through violence or vengeance, but through the proper workings of the law, flawed as that system might be. It was enough. The wedding took place in late January, on a clear, cold day when the snow sparkled like diamonds under a brilliant blue sky. It was a small ceremony held in the church, with Father O'Brien officiating, attended only by close friends and the members of the community who had stood with them through the dark times. Clara wore a simple dress that Sarah Mackenzie had helped her sew white linen with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She had never felt more beautiful. Elias stood at the altar in his best suit, his face shining with happiness and love, and Tommy, dressed in new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, served as ring-bearer, carrying the simple gold bands with all the seriousness of a sacred duty. The vows were traditional, the words spoken by countless couples before them, but they had never meant more. When Elias promised to love and cherish Clara in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, everyone present knew he meant every word. And when Clara promised to honor and respect Elias, to stand by his side through all of life's trials, her voice was strong and sure, without a trace of doubt. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Father O'Brien declared. "You may kiss your bride." And Elias did tenderly and thoroughly, while the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Tommy ran forward and hugged both of them, and they lifted him up between them, the three of them bound together now, not just by love, but by law, by sacred vows, by the blessing of God and community. The celebration afterward was joyous but modest, held in the church hall, with food brought by friends and music provided by anyone who could play an instrument. People danced and ate and told stories, celebrating not just a marriage, but a victory of good over evil, of love over hate, of community over corruption. As evening fell and the party began to wind down, Elias and Clara slipped away, walking back to the ranch through the snow, their arms around each other, Tommy running ahead, throwing snowballs at imaginary targets. The moon was rising huge and silver, painting the world in shades of white and shadow. "Happy?" Elias asked. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Clara replied. 6 months ago I was alone and broken, convinced my life was over, and now I have everything. A husband who loves me, a son who brings me joy every day, a home, a community, a future. It is more than I ever dared hope for." "You deserve all of it and more," Elias said. "You are the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. I am the lucky one, Clara. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, breathing in the cold, clean air, watching Tommy's antics with parental indulgence. Then Clara stopped suddenly, her hand going to her stomach, her face going pale. "Clara, what is wrong? Are you ill?" She turned to look at him, her eyes wide with shock and wonder, and something that might have been fear. "Elias, I think I need to see Doc Harrison. Tomorrow, first thing." "Why, what is it?" "I am not certain. But it is not possible, but I think I might be, Elias, I think I might be pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Elias stared at her, his mind unable to process what she had just said. Pregnant. Clara, who had been told she could never conceive, who had been called barren and broken, who had lost everything because of her supposed failure. Pregnant. "That is not possible," he breathed. "The doctor said—" "I know what they said. But Elias, I know my own body, and something is different. I have been feeling strange for weeks, but I thought it was just stress from everything with Marcus. But now, after today, I cannot ignore it anymore. I think we might be having a baby." Elias swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Tommy came running back to see what the excitement was about, and Elias set Clara down gently, as if she were made of glass. "We are going to Doc Harrison first thing tomorrow," he declared. "But Clara, If you are right, if this is really happening, it is a miracle, a true miracle." That night, neither of them could sleep. They lay in bed, holding each other, talking in whispers about the possibility that had opened before them. Clara was afraid to hope, terrified that she was wrong, that her body was playing some cruel trick on her. But Elias held her close and told her that whatever happened, they would face it together. And if by some chance she was right, if God had seen fit to grant them this impossible gift, then they would accept it with gratitude and joy. The next morning, they went to Doc Harrison's office. The examination took less than an hour. When the doctor emerged from the examination room, his face was split by an enormous grin. "Congratulations," he said simply. "Clara, you are about 3 months along. You are going to have a baby." Clara burst into tears, great racking sobs of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. Elias held her, his own eyes wet, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Doc Harrison clapped him on the shoulder, his own voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to explain it," he said. "Sometimes medicine does not have all the answers. Sometimes what seems impossible happens anyway. Call it a miracle if you like. I certainly cannot think of a better word for it." They walked out of the doctor's office in a daze, barely able to believe what they had just been told. Tommy, who had been waiting with Sarah Mackenzie, saw their faces and knew immediately that something momentous had happened. "What is it? What did the doctor say?" Clara knelt down and took his hands. "Tommy, how would you like to have a baby brother or sister?" The boy's eyes went wide. "Really, really, truly. Really, truly. In about 6 months, there is going to be a new member of our family." Tommy let out a whoop of joy and threw his arms around Clara's neck. "This is the best day ever, better than Christmas, better than anything." The news spread through Dry Creek Valley like wildfire. People who heard it stopped what they were doing and offered prayers of thanksgiving. Sarah Mackenzie cried when she heard, saying it was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. Father O'Brien called it a sign from God that faith and love can overcome any obstacle. Even hardened ranchers and taciturn farmers found themselves moved by the story of the woman who had been called barren, bearing a child for the man who had given her back her life. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of Clara's life. Her pregnancy progressed normally, with none of the complications the doctors had once predicted. She bloomed like a flower in summer, her face radiant, her body growing round with new life. Elias treated her like precious china, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, though Clara laughed and insisted she was perfectly capable of normal activities. Tommy was beside himself with excitement, talking constantly about the baby, making plans for all the things he would teach his new sibling, drawing pictures of the family of 4 they would soon become. He had never known anything but being an only child, and the prospect of having a brother or sister filled him with joy. Spring came to Montana Territory, melting the snow and bringing new life to the valley. The Turner Ranch thrived with Elias, working harder than ever to prepare for the expansion of his family. He built a cradle with his own hands, carefully sanding and finishing the wood until it was smooth as silk. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had never thought she would have. On a warm day in early summer of 1888, Clara went into labor. Doc Harrison came immediately, bringing his wife to assist. The labor was long but not difficult, and as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby girl. When Elias was finally allowed into the room, he found Clara propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The baby had Clara's delicate features and Elias's dark hair, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "We have a daughter," Clara whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Elias, we have a daughter." He sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both of them, his family complete at last. Tears streamed down his face, tears of joy and gratitude and overwhelming love. "What should we name her?" he asked. Clara smiled. "I was thinking hope, because that is what she represents. Hope when we thought there was none. a future when the past seemed to have destroyed everything, hope for all the tomorrows we will share together. Hope Turner, Elias repeated, testing the name. It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect. Everything is perfect. Tommy was allowed in then, climbing carefully onto the bed to peer at his new sister. He reached out a tentative finger to touch her tiny hand, and Hope grasped it with surprising strength, making Tommy giggle with delight. She likes me, he declared. She is going to be my best friend. As the family sat together in the gathering twilight, the new baby sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, Elias thought back to that rainy day in September when he had first seen Clara standing outside the general store, broken and alone. He thought about everything they had been through, all the trials and struggles, the fear and the courage, the moments of despair and the ultimate triumph of love. Sometimes the Lord's best gifts come to those the world calls broken, he said softly, speaking the words that would become the family's motto, the story they would tell for generations, because it is in the breaking that we learn to heal together. Clara looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Together, she echoed, always together. Outside, the summer night settled over Dry Creek Valley, bringing with it the promise of peace and prosperity. The ranch would thrive, the family would grow, and the love that had been forged in hardship would endure through all the years to come. They had fought for their happiness and won it not through violence or vengeance, but through courage, faith, and the unshakable belief that love can redeem even the most broken of hearts. And in the years that followed, when people told the story of Clara Hale and Elias Turner, they spoke not of tragedy overcome, but of grace received not of survival, but of transformation. It became a legend in Montana Territory, the tale of the barren woman who became a mother, the grieving widower who found love again, the broken souls who built something beautiful from the ruins of their past. But for Clara, Elias, Tommy, and little Hope, it was not a legend. It was simply their life, their family, their happily ever after, earned through suffering and sealed with love. And that was miracle enough for anyone. The end.